Welcome to 10-Minute Record Reviews, episode 244. This is just post-Christmas, so I hope all of you who are of a Christmassy persuasion enjoyed yourselves. I am happy to report that I do not have COVID-19 Omicron. 6 days after developing symptoms, I actually managed to get a test. This time, I'm going to talk about a favorite album of mine, Black Sabbath Volume 4, which came out in 1972 on Vertigo in the UK and on Warner Brothers in the US. In 1971, in July, Black Sabbath released Master of Reality, which is a fabulous record, and I reviewed it here about a year ago. They then toured for about 6 months. They'd actually been pretty busy for the previous year and a half, but they were really busy through the latter part of 1971 and into 1972, where they finally played, to close the tour, a hometown gig at the Birmingham Town Hall, which is where Keith McMillan got the famous shot of Ozzy doing the peace signs, which makes the cover here and millions of t-shirts since. They took a little bit of a break, but they wanted to get into the studio because they had been writing while they were on their tour, and they go into Marquee Studios in London that spring to make a couple of tracks, Snowblind, that great ode to Peruvian marching powder, and the kind of throwaway instrumental FX. After about 4 weeks of touring, they want to finish the album, so they end up moving out to LA and renting a house to complete the bulk of what would become Black Sabbath Volume 4. The mansion which they rented in LA, which I've tried to capture here using some pretty dubious screen capturing of my Google Earth zooming and spinning around, was at 733 Stradella Road in Bel Air, which of course is in the hills overlooking LA in general. It belonged to a guy called John DuPont, who was a young guy, was heir to the DuPont chemical fortune. Now, if you're following at home, this is the same John DuPont who, if you've ever watched the movie Foxcatcher, is the slightly crazy guy who ends up setting up his own private wrestling team, complete with the whole kind of wrestling camp and retreat, and then ends up murdering his main wrestling coach, a guy called Dave Schultz, the guy who's played by Mark Ruffalo in the film. May is a great time to be in LA. Well, pretty much any time is a good time to be in LA in my book. And Sabbath made themselves pretty comfortable. The house was big, it was private, had a ballroom, had a swimming pool naturally. And now, bear in mind, of course, these are four working class guys from Birmingham who have been busting their asses making money over the last 2 years, but really touring and recording the whole time, have had very little downtime. And before that, before their first record came out, they really didn't have two sticks to rub together, the four of them. So this is the first time when they actually have some time off, an extended period of time, and the first time they've actually got some money. So needless to say, things don't necessarily go south or sideways, but they take on a certain hue. The party starts early and it goes 24 hours, 7 days a week for 6 weeks. The estimate which they now have, based on their expenditure back in the day, was that they spent $75,000 on cocaine in that 6 weeks. The equivalent today, just in terms of the change in what the money is worth, would be about spending $500,000. There were all kinds of incidents. There was the panic button incident where Ozzy, looking around the kitchen, found a button and wondered what it did and pressed it, and it turned out it was a panic button, which led right to the police station. The police show up within minutes, but they actually have a literal volcano of cocaine on the kitchen table. There was the incident where Bill Ward gets spray painted gold and has some significant health complications from that. There was the incident where the owner, John DuPont, actually makes an unannounced visit, and somehow they managed to survive that. Through all this, however, the band was in such a rich vein of form that they managed to get some amazing music written and recorded. The music on this record is largely recorded, at least the LA tracks, at the record plant, which is about 8 miles east of where they were living. The producer, at least on the record, is listed as Patrick Meehan, but the reality is that he asked for that credit just to line his own pockets. The real producer of this record is Tony Iommi. They were pretty happy with the record plant. They were able to get sounds they weren't able to get in English studios, a much heavier sound they felt. They also had way more tracks available to them to record. This makes quite a big difference, particularly in some of the tracks where there's multiple drum tracks overlaid, like on Super Naught, for instance. They also managed to get some writing done back at the house, despite the 24-hour party scene. The ballroom I mentioned had a grand piano in it. Now, Tony had never actually played keyboards at all, but he started messing around on the piano for a few days and eventually comes up with the well-known riff to the ballad Changes. Band comes in, they start to improvise, and Geezer writes some lyrics which are based on Bill Ward's impending divorce, although Bill Ward didn't know they were about his impending divorce apparently until about 5 years ago. They add a mellotron, and the whole thing comes together. It's either syrupy and trite or very beautiful, depends who you talk to, but it's certainly a very memorable track. They also, after 3 million selling albums, had a decent recording budget for the first time from their label, and so they were able to add a string section. They had a string section to back up the guitars on Laguna Sunrise, and they also had a string section towards the end of Snowblind. Ultimately, after 6 weeks in LA in this cocaine cloud, they realized they're not going to make much headway until they get out of there and get back to the UK. They head back to London, they go into Island Studios, they finish up the record. They then leave the tapes with Warner Brothers and say, we'd like the record to be called Snowblind. Well, Warner Brothers Records execs live in LA, and we're not ignorant as to what that reference meant, so they rejected the idea of calling it Snowblind, wanting to protect America's fragile youth from this influence, and called the band up, asked for a different title. Everybody's on holiday, and Meehan says, we'll just call it Volume 4, which all the band hated, but which, of course, is now absolutely iconic as a title. Side 1 starts with Wheels of Confusion, and if you just put away Master of Reality, their third record, and pop this one on the turntable, instantly you can hear the difference, because the tone that Tony has chosen is very different. It's not that deep, sludgy, frankly very satisfying tone that he had in Master of Reality. It's an equally satisfying but quite different tone, or just like a buzzsaw just cutting through the room. And it's backed up by this incredible rhythm section of Geezer Butler, particularly Bill Ward, who's playing on this record is absolutely unparalleled and maybe the best outing by a drummer in any heavy metal band on any heavy metal record. Why? Not because he's pounding like a maniac, although occasionally he does, but because the rhythm section on this record absolutely swings. There's all kinds of polyrhythms. There's all kinds of slightly off the beat or behind the beat or very subtle choices made by Ward in particular, which just adds so much to, well, the opening track. Snowblind in particular benefits from this as well. Then we have Tomorrow's Dream, the single which failed to chart, which I think is an absolutely fantastic song. It's got a very cool rhythm pounded out by Ward with this kind of galloping feel. But the best parts, both before and after the solo, are these little triplets that Tony plays. Then we have Changes, a song which divides opinion. I will say that what makes Tony's riff writing great when it's played on heavily distorted guitars, which is the pounding repetition, sometimes wears a little bit thin on the lighter numbers when you sort of feel like you wish you had an extra idea or two beyond the riff. FX is basically a minute of shite from people who are just out of their minds on coke. But then going from the ridiculous to the sublime, we have Supernaut. Now this is a track which Beck and Frank Zappa and John Bonham all agree is amazing. It's got two incredible riffs, the opening riff and then the pounding riff that is in behind the verses, which is just amazing. And of course, the other great thing in this song is Bill's incredible drum break. Side 2 starts with Snowblind, that great cocaine song, which completes their great drug trilogy of Sweet Leaf and Hand of Doom. What elevates this song from a really, really good heavy metal tune to one of the greatest heavy metal songs of all time is the fact that it has two incredible bridges. The first one, My Eyes Are Blind, But I Can See, with its descending riff and that sense of a swirling snowstorm, is so evocative. And then the second one, with this weird kind of polyrhythmic galloping rhythm and Ozzy's shouts of defiance, and then you get the wonderful outro solo following that from Tony. So then what do you do once you've achieved metal perfection? Well, the next track is Cornucopia, one of their weirdest tracks. Again, a classic Sabbath multi-part track, doesn't really come together as cohesively as some of their other efforts in that vein. Then we have Laguna Sunrise, very beautiful, Tony on acoustic guitar, a slightly strangely constructed song in that the bridge happens very early and then Tony is kind of left repeating the same figures through the rest of the song. St. Vitus's Dance is a tight little tune which works for the same reasons that Tomorrow's Dream works. And then to end it all, we have another piece of metal magnificence, which is Under the Sun, sometimes subtitled Every Day Comes and Goes, which of course is the song within the song. That magnificent doom-laden opening, and then you get this great galloping riff for the main song. Then you get the song within the song, which is super exciting and fast-paced. And then you get that wonderful ending coda with the slowed down bits slowing down and slowing down and slowing down the way that only Sabbath could do, and they play it completely straight, and it's magnificent. This record, maybe more than any other Sabbath record, bears new gifts with each listening. Crucially, it also has the virtue of never really having been spoiled by having been overplayed. There are some real Sabbath concert staples on here, but very little that troubled the radio. Overall, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any fan of heavy rock music who would not put this record in the top 3 albums released by this band, and that, I think, by definition, makes it a classic metal release. I love it, and for me, it's 5 out of 5 stars.